crops of California. So let's talk about vine crops. So a vine crop is any crop that needs support. It needs like a trellis or a stake, has to be up off the ground. It doesn't matter if it's self-attaching or you attach it. That's just what a vine crop is. It's off the ground. Now, vine crops tend to be high maintenance because if you think about it, if you have a field of 100,000 tomatoes, you have to stake those tomatoes or you have to put them up somehow, which means that you have to have a lot of labor. Again, it's not like a fruit tree where all I have to do is prune a fruit tree, right? Fruit tree is also a lot of labor because it's in time. Fruit tree takes a long time. The vine, the high markup is in the labor because of putting them up. It's not that easy. That's one of the reasons why tomatoes are so expensive, because you have to prune them, keep them off the ground, and that adds also labor. So let's continue on. So you do have to have some sort of support, and they're high maintenance. Let's give you some examples of crops. So you have, of course, grapes, tomatoes, muscadines are like grapes. They're kind of a weird little jelly grape. Kiwis, raspberries, blackberries are on that list. Gourds, like to make like artistic things and to hold stuff. Pumpkins, cucumbers, hops, melons, and dragon fruit and passion fruit. There are a couple more, but those are the major ones. And a lot of our vining crops are kind of strange. Like you might not have heard of passion fruit or dragon fruit or hops before. So they're kind of unusual crops. This is a little picture of an orchard. You could see, a little orchard of grapes. You can see how they're on a trellis. It's also more expensive because you have to actually put in a trellis to pay for the parts. Here's dragon fruit. If you've never seen dragon fruit, that's a picture of dragon fruit. That's growing down by my house in someone's backyard. And you can see how they have to be on basically a metal trellis. So you have to spend money initially to get it set up. Crops like melons and pumpkins, the reason why they're vining crops is because if you've ever grown pumpkins or watermelons, you know that you kind of have to keep them off the ground. And what they do is they grow them on little either paper cardboard boxes or straw or plastic, but if it sits on the ground, little animals are going to start digging into it. So we kind of put them into this crop because they need an additional type of support. Even though you're not typically growing watermelons and pumpkins vertically, which you can, but they don't usually, they still require the maintenance of being off the ground, at least the fruit. So later on, we'll see strawberries, and strawberries are in the same group because of the different things you have to do to keep the fruit off the ground. And for example, you still have to prune them. So this is another reason why they're high value crops. You can't just plant grapes, tomatoes, any of these plants and just let them grow. Because naturally vines get really big and unruly, and they don't produce, for example, on a berry, if you have a raspberry, the part of the berry that produces fruit will never produce fruit ever again. Once it produces fruit, you have to cut that piece off to have a fresh one. So if you can imagine how much pruning is required in a huge field of blackberries after every season. Same thing with grapes. Every part of the grape that produced a grape, they have to go back and cut all that back. So it's kind of complicated. A lot of pruning. Fortunately for us, a lot of these do good in the desert. We're a fantastic place for tomatoes, grapes, and squash and melons do fantastic here. You do better melons than you do down the hill. And grapes do really good out here. Other stuff, not so much. Like you can't grow dragon fruit, unfortunately. Again, grapes have a nice co-op. Grapes from California. We talked about co-op. Grapes are by far the biggest of our vine crops because you have wine grapes and table grapes, which are your fresh eating grapes. Then you have all the grape byproducts and raisins. So pretty big industry all out there. The wine grapes are grown in something called an appellation. An appellation. That's an area where you grow wine grapes. It's like a designated area. For example, Napa Valley wine area, Sonoma Valley wine area. Leona Valley, which is the closest one to here, is Leona Valley, up by Devil's Punch Bowl. And these are different grape regions. Oops. So if you go, for example, let's say if you were to go drive down the hill to Ontario. By the way, Ontario, Fontana area, if you're old enough to remember, there's a lot of grapes down there. That used to be the largest grape producing region in the world, was Ontario and Fontana. When you're on the 15 freeway, you'll still see some of the old grapevines. But every appellation has different types of grapes. So let's say you're a winery down here and you're growing Cabernet Sauvignon. You're growing a different type of Cabernet Sauvignon than, let's say, someone growing a Cabernet Sauvignon up in Napa. And it's really interesting. And that's why you can get so many different grape varieties, wine varieties. Both grapes and table grapes are highly seasonal. For example, a winery, someone growing wine grapes, they only harvest grapes one time in the whole year. So you better imagine they're working like crazy, and that one harvest is super important. That's it. It's either going to make or break you. You don't have any other choice with wine grapes. With table grapes, it's all about finding a niche in the market. For example, Cadiz, their niche is early season grapes, purple grapes. There's a hole in the market where no one's there, no country, no other place really has good early season grapes, mostly because the Chilean grapes are kind of expensive. So their niche is to grow early season, and that's how they make their money. And you can be late season grape, if you live somewhere else. That's how, like, for example, Chilean grapes are popular because they're off season. When it's winter here, it's summer there. So they can ship them here. So very, very seasonal. So that means it's boom or bust. You're like not working. Like winery people are like crazy for 2 months, like absolutely crazy, like 80-hour weeks harvesting and producing, because they have to get their, not only do they have to harvest the grapes, they have to go through the grapes, they have to crush the grapes, process the grapes, and make them into wine. It's not like, oh, we just harvest the grapes and sell them. It's not that easy. There's a big process behind it. By the way, if you want to go to school to grow grapes, it's viticulture. You go to Cal Poly Pomona or San Luis Obispo, fantastic program, really fun. Learn all the things you want about wine. And they're also highly seasonal again. And then specialty grapes are getting really popular. Let me fast forward this real quick. So this is a company called The Grapery. And they've coming up with really fun grapes. My favorite grape is this cotton candy grape because it tastes like cotton candy. They have all these weird grapes like witch's fingers, moon drops, but these are really good, high quality grapes, taste good, that are produced in California. These kind of marketing specialist grapes are really popular here and produced here mostly in California. These are very, very popular. So if you've never had those, they're only available for 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks a year. Huh. Where? Oh, that's another thing. Remember, you guys are in a food desert, so you've probably never seen these for sale because you don't have a Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods or that type of market. So, because they're like, no, we're not going to open a store in the desert. So that's again another example like how certain things are kept from you. Economically, and they're expensive too, but they're really good. I end up buying like 6 packages and freezing them because they taste really good frozen. So here's a typical, we call a typical grape trellis. A lot of vine crops are grown on something like this. Dragon fruits, kiwis, grapes, lots of stuff use this similar type design. This is a wood one. It just happens to be like a telephone pole with 3 wires across. Pretty simple. You can be made out of any material you want, wood, metal, plastic, PVC, but that's your typical construction. The one thing to notice is instead of having, they almost always use wire that's tensioned with a tightener so that as the weather changes, metal wires tend to get softer in the heat, right? And then you have grapes growing on them, so you need to tighten the wires depending on the weather and the season. So if you have static wires, then you end up having structural problems. It pulls on your structure. The other thing you don't notice is when you go see vine grapes or any type of vine crop, They never wind them around. The grapes aren't winding around all this. They're tied to it. You don't wind, because if it winds it around, what happens as it grows? It's going to destroy your structure. The trunk will break apart the supports. And it's not good for the grape after a while to be all wound up. You tie it just straight on the support. It's unnatural, but that's fruit growing. Remember, fruit growing is unnatural because they would never make that much fruit normally, the plants, especially with grapes. The other problem with grapes we have is something called mildew. I didn't put it in your notes, but grapes, if you're interested in grapes, they need lots of organic farmers because a lot of your grapes are organically grown because wine sensitive. They need lots of people for disease control of mildew. So here's the side view, another way you could do your trellis, and you could see, even though the grapes look like they're winding, it's not really wound, it's just being tied at each section. So pruning is very important. Oh. Again, hello. Again, here's another, this variety I like a lot. This is a cheap way to do it. You just get those poles from Home Depot and make a frame out of those with screws, and then you can just get the tighteners. Really easy way to do it. And what you're seeing here, these green tubes, those are PVC pipes that are protecting the base of the trunk of the grapes from like squirrels and rabbits. Because they'll come and nibble on because these are little babies, they'll come nibble on the stems. So I like that one. You can make it out of anything, really. Old-fashioned clothes dryers make nice grape arbors too. You can use a chain link fence, but again, you don't want to wind the stem in and out of your chain link fence. You would just tie it to the chain link fence. Okay. All right, these are our winery districts. So wine growth districts, there are 6 of them. And inside those districts, there's multiple ones. So you can see how Napa and Sonoma has 3 or 4 districts, because that's a huge, big wine area. We're in what they call the San Joaquin Valley South, and we have 15 districts based on where we're at. We're right here. So everywhere in California has wine grapes production, but different areas. And it's a little bit different than like Europe. Like, in France, you know how you have to buy champagne? If it says champagne on there, it has to be from Champagne, France, right? That's the only place that legally can say that. So what do we call champagne produced in California? Sparkling wine. So there you go. So that's just how it works. And sparkling wine is produced in certain parts of California and only in certain parts of Southern California. So that's kind of how they do it. That's how we do the appellation. And you can see there's a lot more. Big time area for wine production is the North Coast, the Bay Area and the North Coast, coming down to the Central Coast. Our local famous wine area is the Temecula wine area. So if you've ever been to the Temecula wineries, that's like there are other winery areas close to us, but that's our biggest, like most famous, highest producing one. Nice place to go right now, if you actually go right now. And they become big tourist areas. So for example, grapes positively affecting the community, the wineries in Temecula out there bring in tourists like crazy. They have the wine tasting buses, which is fantastic. You're on a bus and they take you to winery, and you just get a wine sample all day and eat, and then that's money in everybody's pockets. Restaurants and wine, and you don't have to drive. There's a guy driving you in a van. It's great. So and lots of people do that. It's a good weekend thing. So that helps the local economy in that area. Otherwise, there would be no reason for you to be out in the middle of nowhere in Marietta in these areas. They used to be horse areas. These are our varieties of crushed grapes. 2011 was the latest I could find. I couldn't find anything later that was in a picture. So this is the most recent one I could find. So you could see by far, what's the number 1 grape variety is Chardonnay, which I don't like, but Chardonnay grapes are number 1. When you see other varieties, those are all table grapes. flame seedless, ruby seedless, the perlettes, the cotton candy I showed you. So you can see that almost all of the grapes are for wine. A lot of wine grape production, with the exception of Thompson seedless, of course, and the other grapes. So a lot of wine production. Most of the grapes used for wine. And we are drinking wine like crazy. People your age and my age are drinking 3 times the more wine than your parents did. And so I'm one of those people. So, and it's really driven wine production all over the world. And by the way, California won the wine, I think the best wine award back in the 70s it was. But you could see a lot of wine grapes. Okay, the next one, tomatoes. If I had to choose a crop to grow as a farmer, I would grow tomatoes. I love tomatoes. So tomatoes we're going to throw in this one because no, they're not perennial, but 2, they're everything a vine crop would be. You need to have them pruned, you need to have them staked, and again, they fall in perfectly. They're high dollar crops mainly because they don't ship well. Tomatoes' problem is shipping. Everybody can grow tomatoes pretty much. Tomatoes grow great, but a good tasting quality tomato from a store is a hard thing to find because they don't ship. A nice, beautiful heirloom tomato, perfectly ripe, by the time it gets to you, it'd just be squish. That's why all your store tomatoes don't taste very good. Because they're not bred to taste good, they're bred to ship. To hold up. So that's why they're high dollars. And they're actually pretty high maintenance. If you're growing, for example, you're growing tomatoes, anybody who smokes, if you have someone smoking cigarettes, guess what? They're not working for you. Because you can't get your tomatoes contaminated with tobacco mosaic virus. So that's just not going to happen. And there's all sorts of different things, like there's all sorts of viruses and diseases that can attack tomatoes that are hard to get rid of. If you're an organic gardener, you don't want to have these problems. So you need to do things to prevent them. Also, tomatoes are pretty, like I said, high maintenance. You have to prune them. People just like to plant their tomatoes and let them grow, but real tomato growers only let them grow into 1 stem, 1 or 2 stems. That's why you get a bunch of tomatoes in one little, it's called a truss. That's how they do it, by pruning. So it's pretty high maintenance. Again, tomatoes are also broken into fresh and processed. Ketchup. More than half the tomatoes are produced for saucing and ketchuping. Think of when you go to the market, you have cans of crushed tomatoes, diced tomatoes, tomato paste, and all sorts of weird tomato products made from these tomatoes. Here is an example of how most tomatoes are grown, actually. Hydroponically. So hydroponic tomatoes, big business, because you can grow them year-round. You have control. You can grow more plants per space than in the ground. Look how small the area is that they're in. You can grow way more tomatoes. It costs more up front, but tomatoes are pretty high dollar crops. So if you think about it, each one of those tomatoes is selling for almost $1 if they're big enough. When you go to the store, good tomatoes are pretty expensive. So most of them are grown hydroponically. This is why a lot of places in the desert, I always tell people, if you're in the desert trying to grow a crop, start with tomatoes in a greenhouse, because the land is cheap here, relatively cheap. So building a structure like this is more cost effective than, the old-fashioned way was you'd move to the beach and you'd plant your tomatoes by the beach, but that doesn't happen because you can't do that anymore. There's very few. Does anybody know where the last big tomato farms are by the ocean? They're in the Marine base in San Clemente, San Onofre, by the nuclear power plant. There's this huge row of tomatoes right by the beach because it's a army base and there's a nuclear power plant. But other than that, you're not going to grow. I mean, that was where you used to grow tomatoes, outside, year-round, but you can't anymore. People can do it in their houses, but not in large quantities. So greenhouse tomatoes for year-round is pretty much all you're going to go, because the climate, there's only very few places in the United States where you could grow them year-round. And most of those are gone for agriculture. Okay, another biggie for drinkers. California is a major player in alcohol because we also grow hops. Hops are what you make beer out of. Beer, yeah. So you have all the wine and you have beer now. And just like wine, beer drinking is skyrocketed. Tons of microbreweries and people making local different types of beer like they would with wine has really, really increased the hop production. Hops, however, are interesting. They're not grown in Southern California. They need coolish weather. They like really rich soil, lots of water. So hops are being affected by climate change. Pretty soon we won't be able to grow hops in California because they need cool weather than hot weather. But currently we produce hops mostly in Northern California. And the hop acreage is increasing because of, again, local demand. Instead of not big demand, not that Bud Light's making more beer, more that little people are making more beer. So they're growing more hops. And that's what a hop looks like. They basically, you take those flowers and you ferment them and they make part of beer. Hops are also really interesting. They used to think hops were poisonous because the people would pick hops, the guys that would pick the hops would always fall asleep. They would always fall asleep. And they found out that the hops have a chemical that make you fall asleep. So if you were to, when you go to a hop orchard and you smell them, they smell really good. And if you keep on doing it all day, you'll pass out. It's really kind of funny. This is how hops are grown. And these are tall. So these are about 30, 40 feet. And what they do is they basically just cut the vine at the bottom and pull it down. And put it all into, and then beers are like more complicated. It's got hops and all sorts of other stuff. But that's just one of the main ingredients. But you can see how like local interests, like microbrewery wines, microbrewery beer, changes in industry. That's an economic change, right? Because people are realizing, hey, they can do it themselves. It doesn't cost much more, and it's more fun to do it yourself. Or to go somewhere local, have a locally made beer or a locally made wine. The other one's kiwis. So kiwis come in two types, gold and green. 65% of all the green kiwis in the United States are sold from Fresno, Kings, and Tulare County. And 31% of all the gold kiwis are grown in San Joaquin, Yuba, Sutter, and Butte County. Kiwis are another high dollar crop. They use tons of water. Kiwis are water hogs. And lots of good soil. Kiwis do have a bad rap because of their fuzzy skin. They tend to rate high on the pesticide charts because the fuzzy skin holds all the pesticides. So it's definitely one of the products you want to wash or peel or buy organic. Don't mean to scare you, but it's just the way it is with kiwis. And kiwis are they're pretty popular, and they're also pretty expensive. If you go to price out kiwis, they're a big vine crop. These are kiwis growing in an orchard. See them hanging down. Kiwis are almost always also grown, like you'll see with berries, in a shade house, covered in shade fabric. It's nothing to do with like making them grow better. It's protecting the fruit. That's all it is. Bird exclusion. Cover the whole garden in shade cloth. Makes them lose a little bit less water because you get a little bit more shade and it keeps all the birds out. They don't really do that much with grapes, but they do that a lot with berries and all your kiwis. Here's one that we can grow fantastic in the high desert. Goji berries. Goji berries. Now, goji berries are like one of those new health food crazes. They're a superfood, which they're really high in nutrients. They're good for you. And they grow very well out here in the desert, and they're very expensive. You can make lots of money selling goji berries. They're expensive in the store to buy. They don't taste like much. I have a goji berry plant, which I love. They're just these little things, but they're really good for you. So they're very popular in Asian cultures. And they love the desert. They're actually from the deserts in like Kazakhstan, places like that, China. And the other cool thing about goji berries is it's a famine food. If you guys were really hungry, you could actually eat the leaves, and they taste like spinach. They're good for you. Animals could eat the leaves. In fact, you could chop the whole top of the plant down and feed it to your animals, and then in the spring, the whole thing goes right back. So it's pretty good crop. I like gojis. They're ugly though, ugly plants. Every customer I have, they go, really, that's what it looks like? I'm like, yep. It's just like a big bush thing. Floppy, lays all over the ground. Here's another one that's becoming popular in California, in the frost-free areas down in Southern California. Cal Poly Pomona actually has a test orchard of dragon fruit, which is a cactus, produces these big fruits. And dragon fruit is from Mexico, South America, but it again was popularized in Asian cultures, but it's from Mexico, South America. They call them pitayas, and they're very good, and they're very expensive. Each fruit is about $10. And people buy them. So there's all different types. There's like 100 different types of these. Some are red, some are purple, some are white. Some are sweet, some taste like watermelon. So they're kind of unusual. And again, it's a new crop. And for example, the test for this is down in Irvine, the test crop. Then we have shrub crops. So shrub crops, let's talk about what a shrub is. A shrub is something you can't walk underneath. Right? A tree you can walk underneath. A shrub is just a bush you can't walk, a plant you can't walk underneath. You have to walk around. Now that's a misnomer. I have no idea why they have even the word shrub crops, because it's not even like a technical term for plants. But you'll see that in agriculture they use a lot of non-technical terms to describe plants. I don't know why. But basically shrub crops are going to be things that are bushes. So, but if you think about it, some of these are kind of like vines. So we're going to talk about blueberries. And the reason why I say that is berries. Most of your berries, like blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, are grown on a trellis. Even though they're a bush, they don't let them grow like bushes. Because if you let them grow like a bushes, it's really hard to pick the fruit and all the birds get them and all the animals get them. They grow them up flat so that your workers can come pick them up, pick them real easy. Easy to maintain. So they're kind of managed like vine crops, which is kind of weird. Okay, so most of our shrub crops are berries. All the berries, blueberries especially. Okay, and that's the bulk of our shrub crops in California are berries. Shrub crops like berries are actually relatively low maintenance. Once you make a blueberry bush happy and find out what it makes to make them happy, and they stay happy, they can live for years, decades, and produce berries relatively easy without much pruning. Same thing with the strawberries, right? Strawberries, relatively low maintenance. You just take them out every year and throw away the old ones and replant the babies, and they just keep going. And the cool thing about strawberries, they make their own babies, so you don't have to make new ones, they make them themselves. So they're relatively low maintenance. You don't need no weird structures. The only thing that you might notice is almost all the berries are grown under shade cloth, again, to keep the birds out. Because it's too expensive to do other things. It's cheaper just to put them in these structures and exclude all the birds. If you've ever been up north or been back east where they have lots and lots of blackberries and they grow them in big thickets, you can know how the birds always get them first. Also things like currants. Think about all the weird berries, like currants and thimbleberries and gooseberries. There's a lot of that too, and they're very high priced items. When you go into Whole Foods, like a container of currants is like $6 for just a little thing. But they're good. And they're very, very seasonal. Remember, berries are highly seasonal. Berry season is early spring for about 3 months, May, June, July. Anything grown out of that season is grown in a greenhouse, in a controlled environment. So remember that. So if you're going to buy blueberries in January, you're going to pay twice as much because it's going to come from someone who has to pay twice as much to get that blueberry. And it's not going to taste as good. Blueberries are always best naturally in spring. Okay, so berries, again, high cost, super high demand. There's like not enough blueberries to go around. Like I said, they need protection from wildlife. And like I said, one variety typically only produces one time of the year. So if you're a blueberry farmer, you might have different types of blueberries, like an O'Neill, a Sharp Blue, and then a Blue Beauty. That way you're picking over a long period of time. And if you're growing in your garden, let's say you were growing blueberries, you need more than one blueberry. And you need to have two different types so they can cross-pollinate. So they have to remember that. Blueberries are very hard to grow if you don't know what they like. So what you should write down your notes, because it's not on here, is berries in general like acidic conditions. Really rich black soil with acid. So that would be some place that has lots of pine trees like the Pacific Northwest. Our soil out here in the desert is not acidic. It's alkaline. So if you want your berries to grow good, you make your soil as acidic as possible and give them some good water. They're like coffee grounds. If you guys drink coffee, old coffee grounds just thrown in the ground, it's pretty good for the soil. Here is an example of what I meant by a shade house. This is just shade fabric, which is, again, a bird exclusion, just to keep out bugs and birds and animals from eating the berries. That's all that is. The worst nightmare of a berry producer is a windstorm, because it destroys their wind tunnels and they have to go out and fix them. Blueberries. So out of the berries, I don't know why I started with blueberries first, but blueberries are the second largest berry that California produces. Think Driscoll's berry producers from California. In California, we produce something called a high bush, a southern high bush, which is a specific type of blueberry for the warm climate. So if you're going to grow blueberries in California, it has to be a southern high bush, or else nothing's going to happen. Again, rich acidic soil, clean, non-salty water. So there goes most of the Central Valley, because the water has to be good quality. And the season for California blueberries is only 8 weeks. It's crazy. So imagine those farmers have to recoup all their yearly money in 8 weeks. That's when they have to make their profit. So it's pretty intense. Here are the top states nationally. California is number 2. So Florida is the first production of blueberries, and you have California, and then Georgia, then North Carolina. So you can see it's mostly states that have acidic soil. Because in Northern California, Washington, Oregon, really easy to grow blueberries because you have acidic soil. Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, also acidic soil. Lots of water. So kind of more geologically. And you notice they're not in the middle of the country where it's really cold. They tend to be coastal plants. They grow a lot of blueberries up in Humboldt County. Here's your weeks. Remember I was talking about being a farmer and having a short amount of time. So all the blueberry people are in a co-op. So for example, Driscoll's, which sells a lot of blueberries, depending on the time of the year, will get their blueberries from different places. So where do people get blueberries from May to July? California, North Carolina. Right? So that's how it works. And it's the same with all crops. The exception being things like tomatoes, which produce year-round if they're in the right climate. Again, that's why I love tomatoes. Because if you're in a good climate, you can grow them year-round. And then you can see how places like Oregon and New Jersey, they take over the market later in season. We kind of have to fight with a little bit of everybody in California for our market share. So here's again how a co-op works. Blueberries and what is a fantastic example. So here we have Nature Ripe, which is a grower-owned co-op owned by all the blueberry growers. So what it's made of, if you read this, and you can do it at home, is basically you have a company called MBG Marketing, which is this one company. They're the largest marketer of blueberries. Marketer. They don't make blueberries. So this company, MGB Marketing, has marketed blueberries under the name Nature Ripe since 1936. They're located in all states and in almost every major store, that brand. So that's what they do. They're marketing. Then you have another one called Munger Farms, and this is the largest California blueberry grower. Guess what they do? They make infused berry products, vodkas, infused liquors, and ready-to-eat blueberries. That's all they make. It's fresh blueberries. Largest company, marketing. Largest company, fresh blueberries. And you have another one, which is nature-ripe berry growers, which is strawberries, raspberries, blackberries. They're jam. And what they're doing is they're growing in California, Florida, and Mexico. So they're probably the off-season people. And then continue up here, hortfruit, leader in Chilean berry industry. So if you're growing berries here, you're in the same co-op, you're in the same group of people as people growing in Chile. And you agree with them because guess what happens? In the wintertime, are you making blueberries? No, they are. So instead of being competitive with them, you're working with them. Right? You're setting prices together, you're developing supply chains together. Because you can't, it's easier to work together than it is to work apart. Because you're not making winter fruit anyways. How am I doing on time? Pretty good. Okay, this was actually the one that was supposed to be the biggest one, but strawberries are California's #1 berry. So strawberries definitely #1. I think it's 90% of all the U.S. grown strawberries are from California. We think of them as a row crop because we see them growing in rows on the ground, and they're not big woody things, but they're perennials. They don't die after a season. And they're actually a berry. They're closely related to blueberries, not blueberries, sorry. They're closely related to blackberries, raspberries, and boysenberries. And the cool thing about strawberries, the cool or bad thing, is you have to keep them off the ground. So most always you see them growing on these little mounds with some sort of fabric barrier. That becomes a little bit of a nightmare for maintenance, as you can imagine. You have to have a tractor to make that and a watering system. What they would usually do is the bubblers, the little what do you call it's like not a bubbler hose, but it's like a soaker hose, is underneath this. So subsurface irrigation to protect the water. And they are grown on the ground on little mounds. They're a high dollar crop because everything eats strawberries. Strawberries, again, are one of your #1 pesticided product. So if you buy strawberries, always wash them because they require tons of spraying. In fact, it's really hard to find organically grown strawberries. This is why strawberries are the perfect crop for, again, hydroponics. Most of your successful strawberry growers, if they're not in coastal California, don't grow their strawberries outside anymore. Because you can't compete with the coastal California ones that are growing year-round in the perfect climate. You can compete by bringing it indoors, and then you can that's how they outcompete us, by growing indoors. Because indoors you have perfect control and there's no pests, right? You can, in theory, you can kind of keep out all the animals, and it's really easy now to have them on tables where you can pick them instead of laying on the ground. You don't have to spray as much, right? So a lot of our strawberry production is moving towards hydroponic indoor production because it's better for the environment, better for us. Plus, if you have to grow strawberries in general, you have to have a lot of space, the old-fashioned way, growing them out in the ground, where in a greenhouse you can notice they have how many levels? They might have 3 or 4 racks high, so you can really, really maximize your space. Again, California strawberries do have their own little thing, their own little co-op. 90% grown in California, most outdoors in the central part of the state, by like a city of Guadalupe, Lompoc, central part there. Orange County, like Westminster, Garden Grove used to be huge strawberry areas. In fact, Garden Grove is the strawberry city where they have a strawberry festival, but there's no more strawberries there. It's all houses. And that's why most of them are grown in greenhouses. And strawberries are really interesting because how much money they make. And I like this little chart. So when you think about your crop that I gave you, look at this chart. This is the impact of strawberries and how the money is divided. So like the total strawberry market share is $3.4 billion a year. And it breaks it down. So you kind of, I'll go through because you can't see it. You have trucking, box companies, railroads, warehouses, retailers, right? You have the infrastructure. That's all they do is, there's people that have companies, all they do is transport strawberries. They don't grow strawberries. They just take strawberries from him to the store, back and forth. Separate company. There is the fertilizer companies, the tractor companies, the tool companies, right? All those people. Another industry, huge industry. You have your local businesses, your restaurants, the guys who rent your porta potties from for your workers, right? The McDonald's where your workers go eat. Auto dealerships where the people buy cars from. Local cities where your workers buy their houses. And then the last one is your public services, police, security, fire, and health. So they're all affected in big time, and there's whole areas of California where the entire economy is strawberries. Go to Santa Maria, California. Santa Maria, California is a total strawberry town. Everything there has to do with growing strawberries. And when the strawberry times are bad, the city times are bad. The population's low, there's less work, vice versa. So, and this relates to what? Taxes. Taxes are affected for everybody depending on how much strawberries are grown. Land value is affected by how much strawberries are grown and vice versa. Just kind of nice little neat little chart to show you how it's doing. And for example, the strawberry farmers are getting $2 billion out of that 3.4. So they're getting a little bit more than half of the money, which is really good for growers. Okay, and then you can see the indirect impacts. All these other businesses get the rest of the money. They make $1.4 billion off of the strawberries. And the total number of family-owned farms is 400. So there's 400 family-owned strawberry farms in California. So this is the information that I'm kind of wanting you to kind of get for your crop. And this is provided by the California Strawberry Commission. So take your crops and you can do research. You'll be able to find different things. Oh, and there's that $70,000, 70,000 jobs created thing. That's just strawberries. So showing how each crop affects the community. Here is the strawberry acreage chart. You can see it's right here. This is where Orange County. This is San Luis Obispo and a little bit up here in the Kings Valley. The only other area where they grow lots of strawberries, is in Florida, and they grow alpine strawberries up here in Washington and Oregon, but those are a little different. So you can see most of it is in California. In fact, what does that mean? Let's see the number. So yeah, 59,000 acreage, 59,000 acres. So it says each state contributed to the total national acreage. So California has 60% of the total acreage in strawberries, and that produces 90% total of all the strawberries. So that's a pretty good ratio. It means we're efficient with our land. If it was a lower ratio, it wouldn't be as good. And you're starting to see, I don't know if you've noticed this, but most of you remember all the maps I was showing you with fruit and vine production? A lot of it is not happening in the middle, right? Showing you grape production, nothing's happening in the middle. I was showing you dragon fruit production. That's because fruits, that's why California is so good at fruit production. We have the weather for it. Hot summer, just a cool enough winter to keep the plants asleep and to make sugars. In the center of the country, it's too much of a drastic. It's too hot in summer and too cold in winter. So it limits how much plants we can grow and the types of varieties we can grow. So for example, in grapes, if you live in Chicago, you can only grow maybe 25% of the grape varieties that you could grow here in California because of the climate. So it's all climate driven. What does the middle of the country do a good job growing? Field crops, corn, soybeans, annual crops, right? Things that don't live on from winter to summer, things that die at the end of the year. And then we have cannabis, which is thrown into this one. Cannabis is going to be probably, I would consider it a shrub crop. And it's going to be regulated like grapes. So, for example, cannabis, both medical, recreational, legal or illegal, has been a huge part of the economy for a long time, and it will be even bigger in the future. And it is grown both outdoors and indoors. And the reason why I bring it up is because it's a really interesting policy experiment. You guys are going to be firsthand seeing how it affects your local economy here because of Adelanto. And going back to the strawberry chart, right? All of this pertains. You're going to have people that are going to be delivery and all sorts of stuff. And I bring cannabis here too because there's a lot of back and forth. For example, tomato growers. People think, oh, high dollar, cannabis is super high dollar, but growing tomatoes is almost as profitable as growing medical marijuana, or just about as profitable. So there's still other crops that are holding their own, so it's not like they're going to disappear. And the reason why we put it in this group is the way it's going to be managed. Because if you're growing it indoors, it's not going to be a field crop, right? Growing in rows. And most of the places in California, people aren't going to be growing the marijuana outside. It's just not the way it's working. Because just like the tomato farmers, right? If you can have one crop versus 20 crops, you're going to choose 20 crops. And also, unlike other crops, you just can't, nobody really cares if you got tomato plants in your front yard. Okay? But you can't just have like weed plants going in your front yard. If it's legal or not, it's just not a safety, it's not safe, kids can go get it, it's not safe for you. So there's going to be different things. So that's why another good career choice is indoor agriculture. Aquaponics, hydroponics, all the weird ponics, they're all the same thing. Not just for cannabis production, but for all of them. Because like places in the desert, like take Israel, that has very little water. And the way they solved their problem was growing their plants in water, hydroponics, aquaponics. Because yes, it's a water intensive system, but you get maximum control of that water. And you can harness the water in a very smart way, put it under a greenhouse, and you're actually conserving water versus growing that same crop traditionally outside. And you're making more money because you can now produce crops more consistently versus once a year, and then you're at the mercy of the weather. Like what's going to happen this year with apples? Apple prices are going up. Because in Washington, where they grow a lot of Washington apples, they had a late freeze. So that killed all the apple flowers. So Washington apple prices will go up, but there's still other apples growing out here. And then I have I think that's the last slide. Oh, and which is really interesting about cannabis is how they're growing it like wine. These are the designated legal areas of the California where medical marijuana will be grown, and we're in one of them, the desert area, which is the cities of Barstow, Adelanto, Hellendale, and some other ones. And there's a few in Orange County. Newport Beach will be one of those cities that will produce medicine products. So medicine products. And there's going to be a lot in the Central Valley and a lot up north, as you guys all know. So where it's staying. But that's actually kind of interesting. They're going to be, for example, Hawaii is the only other competitor we have. Because the only people where they're allowed to produce nationally will be these states here. So like Colorado, nothing leaves Colorado. So that's why it's not on the map. So California is actually doing a little different than a lot of the other states. It's going to be exactly like wine, regulated like wine, which is kind of exciting because it means people like me, my income goes up because I am a horticulturist. I'll tell people how to grow plants. So that's an exciting thing for you. Just imagine if tomatoes were illegal and all of a sudden they're legal. You're going to have a lot of tomato growers. But I love tomatoes. Grow tomatoes. And I think that's it. Any questions on tree, bush, vine crops? All righty. Let's go.